Her. She did everything right. She was kind. She was patient. She sat waiting by the phone, and the more she gave, the quicker he pulled away. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. And over the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly why. Because there are 4 specific things, 4 moves, 4 habits that quietly destroy your value in the eyes of someone who's wired to pull back the moment things feel too close, and almost nobody notices themselves doing them until it's already too late. So here's a question before we go any further. Have you ever felt yourself shrinking inside a relationship? Not louder, not more sure of yourself, smaller. If that word just struck something in you, stay with me, because what you're about to hear might explain years of confusion in just a few minutes. Let's talk about how the mind works when someone is built to avoid closeness, not to judge them, not to paint them as the villain, but to understand the wiring. Because understanding that wiring is the only way to stop losing yourself inside it. An avoidant nervous system isn't cold by chance. Somewhere early on it learned that closeness equals danger. Not necessarily physical danger, but emotional danger. A need that went unanswered. A moment of vulnerability that got punished. A closeness that turned into control. So the mind quietly built a wall, brick by brick. And that wall doesn't come down because you're lovable. It doesn't come down because you're patient. It comes down, if it ever does, only when the nervous system feels safe enough to lower it on its own terms. This is the part almost nobody understands. Emotional intelligence isn't about reading someone's words. It's about reading their nervous system. And an avoidant nervous system runs on one core rule: autonomy first, closeness second. The instant autonomy feels threatened, everything shuts down. Warmth turns into distance. Interest turns into silence. And the person left standing there confused, wondering what she did wrong, is often the one who did the most. Think of it like a thermostat. Every relationship has a comfort setting for closeness. For most people, that setting adjusts slowly and gently over time. But for an avoidant mind, the setting is narrow, very narrow. Too much warmth, too fast, and the internal alarm goes off. Not because the warmth is unwanted, but because the nervous system was never taught that warmth can be received without a cost attached. So it does what any system does when it senses overload. It shuts a valve. It creates distance, not out of malice, but out of self-protection that was wired in long before this relationship ever began. Now here's the piece that changes everything about how you respond to this. That thermostat can't be moved by force. It can't be pushed, convinced, or loved into expanding faster than it's ready to. Every attempt to force it, every extra text, every extra reassurance, every extra ounce of proof that you're safe to get close to, actually tightens the valve even more. Because force itself, no matter how well meant, registers as pressure. And pressure is the exact opposite of the safety an avoidance system needs to slowly, on its own timeline, let someone in. This is why the 4 behaviors we're about to walk through matter so much. They aren't random dating mistakes. Nearly every time, they're attempts to manually override that thermostat, attempts to force safety, force reassurance, force closeness through sheer effort. And every single one backfires in a strikingly similar way. Not because the woman doing them is a bad person, but because effort aimed at someone else's fear almost never works. The only effort that actually works is effort aimed inward, at your own steadiness, your own life, your own sense of self. That's the thread running through everything that follows. That's the cruel irony sitting underneath this whole topic. The more effort you pour in at the wrong moment, in the wrong way, the more your value drains out. Not because you aren't enough, but because of how the avoidant brain interprets that effort. And today, we're breaking down the 4 exact behaviors that trigger this drop, so you can spot them, catch them early, and protect the one thing that actually keeps someone like this engaged, your own sense of self. Let's start with the first one. Number 1, chasing the silence. This is the most common one, and it feels so natural that most women don't even realize they're doing it. He goes quiet, and instead of matching that quiet, she fills it. She texts again. She calls. She sends a message explaining what she meant by her last one. She shows up earlier than planned just to close the gap that opened between them. Here's what's actually happening underneath. Silence to an avoidant mind is regulation. It isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's simply the nervous system taking a breath, processing, recalibrating. But when that silence gets chased, when it's filled right away with more contact, more reassurance, more presence, the avoidant brain reads it as pressure. And pressure is the one thing that nervous system can't tolerate. So what happens next? The wall goes up faster. The distance that was temporary becomes permanent. And worse, something shifts internally. Chasing signals imbalance. It says without a single word, I need this more than you do. And the moment that imbalance becomes visible, value drops fast. This isn't about playing games. It isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about understanding a basic emotional law. Whoever needs the relationship less holds more emotional gravity. Whoever chases the hardest holds the least. An avoidant partner is scanning, consciously or not, for signs of that gravity, and chasing removes it instantly. Picture 2 versions of the same moment. Version 1. He goes quiet for 2 days. She notices, feels the pull of anxiety building, and sends a message. No response. She sends another, softer one, checking if everything's okay. Still nothing. By the third day, she's replaying every recent conversation, searching for what she might have said wrong. And when he finally does resurface, casual, like nothing happened, she's so relieved she never even brings up the silence. She just absorbs it. And underneath, without a single word being spoken, a lesson has been taught. Disappearing costs nothing. She'll still be there. Version 2. He goes quiet for 2 days. She notices, feels that same pull, but instead of acting on it right away, she goes to dinner with a friend. She finishes a project she'd been putting off. She sleeps well, because her sense of okayness was never actually tied to his response time in the first place. When he resurfaces, she's warm, but she's not waiting. No interrogation, no anxious energy underneath the surface. Just a woman who kept living. And that difference, even though it looks small from the outside, sends a completely different signal. It says, "My world doesn't pause for your silence." And that signal, more than any clever text, is what actually holds an avoidant partner's attention, because it's the one thing they can't predict or control. The fix isn't complicated, but it is uncomfortable. When the silence comes, let it sit. Don't fill it with noise. Let your own life get louder instead. Your friends, your work, your mornings, your evenings. Let that space be filled by you living fully, not by you waiting anxiously. That single shift, from chasing the silence to living inside your own life, is one of the most protective moves a woman can make. Now, here's something worth pausing on before we move to the second one. If this is landing, if you're recognizing a pattern from your own life right now, drop the word recognize in the comments. Just that one word. It helps more people find this before they repeat the same pattern. And while you're there, hit subscribe, because the next 3 go even deeper than this one, and you won't want to miss where this leads. Number 2, losing your own shape. This one is quieter than chasing. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like agreement. It looks like flexibility. It looks like being easygoing. But underneath, something serious is happening. A slow erosion of who you are. It starts small. You used to like going out on Fridays. Now you don't, because he doesn't. You had opinions about politics, about food, about how you wanted to spend a Sunday. Slowly those opinions get softer, quieter. You start agreeing before you've even checked in with what you actually think. Not because you changed your mind, but because keeping the peace started to feel more important than keeping yourself. Here's a psychological trap hiding inside this. Emotional intelligence teaches us that attraction isn't built on sameness, it's built on differentiation. A person needs to sense that there's a whole separate human being on the other side of the relationship, someone with their own gravity, their own center. The moment that center disappears, the moment a woman becomes an extension of what he wants instead of a person with her own wants, something in the avoidant mind loses interest. Not because he's cruel, but because there's nothing left to reach for. No mystery, no pull, just an echo of himself. This is deeply counterintuitive because most people believe closeness comes from merging, from becoming one unit, thinking the same way, wanting the same things. But real closeness, the kind that lasts, comes from 2 whole people choosing each other again and again, not one person disappearing into the other. Think of 2 trees growing near each other in a forest. The healthy ones sink their roots deep into their own ground, branches reaching toward the light in their own direction, and still somehow their canopies end up touching, overlapping, sheltering the same patch of earth. Neither one had to give up its own roots for that closeness to happen. That's what real connection actually looks like. Not 2 people fused into one shape, but 2 whole shapes standing near enough to shelter each other. Think about the woman who used to run every Saturday morning. It was hers, nobody else's. She'd come home energized, a little proud of herself, ready for the day. Then the relationship started. He wasn't a morning person, so Saturday morning slowly turned into time to be together instead. First it was occasional, then it became the default. A year in, she couldn't remember the last time she'd laced up her shoes before 9 a.m. Nothing dramatic happened, no argument, no demand. Just a slow, quiet trade, made one small yes at a time, until an entire piece of who she was had been handed over without either of them ever really noticing. Here's why this matters so much to an avoidant partner specifically, more than it might in other dynamics. Avoidant attachment often comes with a deep, sometimes unconscious fear of engulfment, a fear of being consumed, absorbed, needed so completely that there's no room left to breathe. When a partner starts losing her own shape, when her calendar becomes his calendar, when her opinions start mirroring his opinions, that fear doesn't calm down. It grows because now there's a full person leaning on him for identity. And that feels like exactly the kind of closeness his nervous system was built to run from. So if you've noticed yourself shrinking your opinions, cancelling plans with friends, letting your hobbies quietly fade, softening your voice until it barely sounds like you anymore, this is your signal. Not to become harder, not to become distant, just to come back to yourself. Keep the Friday plans. Keep the opinion, even when it's inconvenient. Keep the version of you that existed before the relationship started wearing your edges down. That version isn't the obstacle to being loved. It's the entire reason you were noticed in the first place. Number 3, explaining yourself into smaller and smaller pieces. This one hides inside good intentions. You want to be honest. You want to be understood. So when there's tension, when there's a misread text, when there's a moment of distance, you explain and then explain the explanation. You clarify your tone. You clarify your intent. You go back 3 days later to clarify something that everyone else has already forgotten. Here's what over-explaining actually communicates, whether you mean it to or not. It says, I'm anxious about how you see me. It says, your view of me matters more than my own peace. And to an avoidant nervous system that reads as pressure, just a quieter version of it. Every extra explanation is a small plea for reassurance, and reassurance seeking, no matter how gently it's delivered, signals insecurity. Not because you are an insecure person, but because in that specific moment, your actions are broadcasting a need for approval louder than they're broadcasting self-trust. There's a subtle but important difference between communicating and over-explaining. Communicating states something once, clearly, and lets it exist. Over-explaining states something, then restates it, then adds context, then checks if the context landed, then adds more context in case it didn't. One is confident, the other is anxious, and the avoidant mind can feel the difference instantly, even if it can't always name it. Imagine a small, almost forgettable moment. A text goes out, running a bit late tonight, sorry. The reply comes back short. Okay, that's it, just okay. For most people, that single word passes without a second thought. But for someone caught in this pattern, that one word becomes a puzzle to solve. Is he annoyed? Did the plans change? Is something wrong? So a follow-up goes out. Just checking you're not upset about tonight. Then, when the reply doesn't come fast enough, another one. If you'd rather reschedule, that's totally fine. Just let me know. By the time he actually responds, casual, no issue at all, 3 messages have already gone out, each one quietly broadcasting a need for reassurance that was never actually necessary. Here's a part that stings a little but needs to be said plainly. Every one of those follow-up messages costs something, not because the person receiving them is keeping a tally, but because each one nudges the emotional center of gravity a little further from calm and a little closer to anxious. And an avoidant partner, already scanning for signs of pressure, picks up on that shift almost instantly, even if he couldn't explain exactly why the exchange suddenly felt heavier. The fix here is almost radical in its simplicity. Say what you mean once, clearly, kindly, and then let it rest. Trust that your words landed. If they didn't, that will become clear on its own, without you chasing understanding through 5 extra messages. This one change, saying it once and letting it breathe, protects something that constant explaining slowly drains away. Your own sense of certainty. And certainty, more than almost anything else, is magnetic. Number 4. Accepting less than what you actually deserve. This is the heaviest one, and it's the one that does the most long-term damage, not just to the relationship, but to the woman herself. It looks like tolerating inconsistency. Answering when he reaches out after days of silence, as if the silence never happened. Making excuses for behavior that would never be acceptable from a friend. Lowering the bar quietly, again and again, until the bar is on the floor and nobody even remembers where it used to sit. Here's the psychological truth underneath this. People, avoidant or not, calibrate their behavior based on what gets accepted. If disrespect gets absorbed without consequence, disrespect continues. Not because the other person is keeping score out of malice, but because human behavior follows the path of least resistance. If there's no friction, there's no reason to change course. And this is where self-respect becomes the single most important variable in the whole equation. Not chasing less, not talking less, self-respect. Because self-respect isn't something you announce, it's something you show through action. It's leaving a conversation that turns disrespectful. It's not answering the message that shows up 3 days late, as if those 3 days meant nothing. It's having a life so full, so anchored, so genuinely yours, that someone else's inconsistency simply doesn't have room to sit at the center of it. Consider 2 women, both dating someone who tends to go quiet for days at a time without warning. The first one adjusts her whole schedule around the possibility that he'll finally reach out. She turns down other plans just in case. She stays reachable at all hours. When he does resurface, she welcomes him back instantly. No questions, no boundary, no mention of the 4 silent days that just passed. Over time, the relationship becomes something she manages, not something she enjoys. The second woman notices the same pattern early, and instead of rearranging her whole life around it, she names it calmly, once. Something like, I need more consistency than this to feel good in a relationship. Not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, just as information about who she is and what she needs. And then, crucially, she lives accordingly. She makes plans. She stays busy. If the inconsistency continues, she draws her own conclusions and acts on them without waiting for permission to have standards. Here's the part that matters most. When a woman holds her own standard quietly, consistently, without announcing it, without ultimatums, without drama, something shifts in how she's perceived, not because she performed value, but because she embodied it. And avoidant partners, even with all their distance, all their walls, all their fear of closeness, are still human. On some instinctive level, they still sense when they're in the presence of someone who knows her worth without needing it confirmed. That presence is rare, and rarity, in every psychological sense, is what creates value. Before we bring these together, it's worth naming something that often gets missed in conversations like this. None of this means an avoidant partner is somehow blameless, or that all the responsibility sits on the woman's side of the relationship. That's not what this is about. People with avoidant patterns still have work to do. Their own fears, their own walls, their own history, that's theirs to face, not something anyone else can face for them. What we're focusing on here is the one half of the equation you actually have control over: your own behavior, your own patterns, your own sense of self. Because you cannot force someone else's growth. You can only protect your own. So let's bring these four together, because they aren't separate problems. They're one single pattern wearing four different masks: chasing the silence, losing your own shape, explaining yourself into smaller pieces, accepting less than you deserve. Every single one comes from the same root: trying to control how someone else feels about you, instead of trusting how you feel about yourself. And here's the reframe that changes everything if you let it land. You cannot regulate someone else's nervous system by shrinking your own. You cannot earn consistency by becoming smaller, quieter, more agreeable, more available. Those strategies feel logical in the moment because they feel like doing something, anything, to fix the distance. But they work against you every time because they signal the exact opposite of what actually attracts steadiness. They signal need. And need, especially to someone wired for distance, triggers retreat. What actually works is almost the opposite of instinct. Stay whole, stay busy with your own life, say things once and let them stand. Keep your standards even when it feels lonely to keep them, not as a strategy to manipulate someone into staying, but as a practice of respecting yourself enough that staying or leaving becomes their decision to make, not yours to force. There's a concept in emotional intelligence worth borrowing here: the idea of self-regulation under pressure. Most people think self-regulation means staying calm on the outside while chaos happens on the inside. But real self-regulation runs deeper than that. It's the ability to feel the anxiety, feel the urge to chase, feel the fear of losing someone, and still choose your next move based on your values instead of your panic. That gap between the feeling and the reaction is where everything in this video actually lives. Chasing happens in that gap. Over-explaining happens in that gap. Lowering your standards happens in that gap. And so does the opposite. Staying grounded happens in that exact same gap, just with a different choice made inside it.